Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're going to be doing another installment of our weekly meta breakdown. For those of you who are new to this segment, what we do is weekly we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder, broken down by various formats. And the way we collect this data is through a companion tool called UntapGG. It runs alongside your Arena client, tracks your win rates, your collections, aggregates a bunch of useful data that you can use to help you kind of track what's working for you in terms of decks, combinations, or even just suggest you decks you can build. There's also like in-game draft help and stuff like that. It's free to get started with it if you do want to use it. The link is in the video description down below. We are looking at this video, so normally I do standard all in one shot, both best of one and best of three. This particular week, there's a lot of best of one decks that are putting up some pretty good results. So I thought I would do kind of a carved out best of one version for the folks who are interested in that, and then I'll do a standalone best of three, and then we'll revisit it in future weeks depending on how much deviation we see between the two formats. As always, I do include these deck lists that can be imported directly to Arena in the video description down below. So if you do want to copy those, nice and easy. And before we jump in, as always, if you do enjoy this type of content, greatly appreciate it if you could drop a like and comment on the video. It's a free way to help grow the channel. And if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing to the channel. Another free way to help out. We do, in addition to these meta videos, we do a bunch of gameplay. Frequently top 1200 Mythic, but we try a bunch of brews, and I usually get there each month with like a tier 2 deck or so. But jumping into standard best of one, and we looked at March 26th through April 2nd. Saturday to Saturday range this go around, and Platinum to Mythic rank, we're looking at 190,000 matches played from this, and we're looking at a filter of at least 200 plus games played with each of the deck. And the top performing deck of the week, as it's been the last few weeks, is Mono White Aggro. While Mono White has been the top, we've seen varied versions of it pop up. We've seen Wandering Emperor, we've seen no Wandering Emperor, we've seen Crawling Barons, we've seen no Crawling Barons. This particular list is shedding the Wandering Emperor a little bit lower to the ground. We're seeing the removal package. They're going with a split this time. So we're seeing 2 Portable Holes, 2 Brutal Cathars, 3 Skyclave Apparition. So return to Skyclave Apparition. Has a little bit more game against the non-creature matchups, but worse against kind of token style strategies. Can hit something like a Sorin Planeswalker, for example, or a Meat Hook Massacre, but Brutal Cathar can hit tokens that kind of pop up. We're also seeing the anti kind of control package of Elite Spellbinder and Reidane popping up, and then just 2 of Adeline as kind of the premier attacking 3-drop, I would say. It's the best of the attackers kind of played into there. You pair this with your 1-drops and Hopeful Initiate and Usher. 4 of Intrepid Adversary. We've seen these numbers fluctuate depending on whether or not they're playing Wandering Emperor. You have your Luminarch Aspirants, Thalias, and then finally Legion Angels with the 3 in the sideboard. 23 lands in this version, 1 Eiganjo, and 2 Cave of the Frost Dragons. So 400 games played, 64%, 65% win rate, kind of coming through. Next up is a deck we haven't seen too popular really recently. It's Mono Green Stompy. 230 games played with this one, 62-ish% win rate. And really with this one here, we're seeing the introduction of a new card to the deck, another 3-drop. So they got off of the Kazandu Mammoth, and instead they're playing Jugan Defends the Temple. So this is a 3-mana mythic. So Chapter 1, you get a 1/1 monk that ramps you. Chapter 2, you get to put counters on up to 2 creatures. And then Chapter 3, you flip it, becomes a 2/2 flyer. And then whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you get to put X/1/1 counters. And then if you have 5 or more modified creatures, Remnant of the Rising Star itself gets 5/5/5 and trample, so it becomes a 7/7 trampler. So you can make like Old Growth pretty large. You have a bunch of trample creatures kind of playing into it. Notably, no Rangers class in this one, so you're really just modifying your creatures with the Jugan here. You have Unnatural Growth and then Invoke the Ancients as well. As ways to make tokens that you can then copy with the Esika's Chariot. You're still playing Snowlands for the Blizzard Brawl, as well as Sculptor of Winter kind of mixed into there. So interesting to kind of see the adaptation. And like a cool thing with the untap, like I was mentioning, so for example with this Jugan, I'm missing 3 of them. So if I want to craft this deck, I need 3 mythics based on my collection, which is synced here. I have 17 mythics, so you're able to see what you can and can't build. So it's kind of a cool way there. Up next, Naya Humans, 61-ish%. So this is another deck that's basically mono, white, splash, green, and red for various cards. It's usually some copies of Halana and Elena. Sometimes you'll see Sigarda. So this version's off of Sigarda, instead playing a Legion Angel and the Snakeskin Veils as a full playset, in addition to Shijiri, Shelter, and Valor's Stance as some protection spells. This version here, you're also seeing like the 4 Brutal Cathars as opposed to Skyclave Apparition, 4 of Reidane as well, kind of mixed into there. So very similar in terms of an aggressive slanted deck. You can go over the top with something like Halana and Elena, but you do end up with slightly worse mana just by the off chance that your lands might just come into play untapped at various times. They are opting to play full 4 of Cave of the Frost Dragon as well, which is interesting. In your 1-drop slot, you're kind of split between Chaplain and Hopeful Initiate in this one. No kind of 4 of this. I think this is a 4 of is not bad just because it grows really well. Just like naturally curving this into most of your 2-drops starts growing it. And it lets you kind of have another access to enchantments and auras. Enchantments and artifacts. And then again, just the sideboard in there. Up next, Mono Blue Delver. Mono Blue Spirits, if you may. So just under 60% win rate, 340 matches. And this deck is kind of a Protect the Queen tempo style deck. So you want to drop on turn 1 like an Aspirant Spirit or Delver's Secrets. And then you just kind of tempo out your opponent the next few turns. You're able to do that with like bouncing their stuff with Fading Hope, phasing out your opponent's stuff with March of the Swirling Mist or Spectral Adversary. This gets you around attackers, potentially blockers, so you kind of play offense-defense with these types of cards. You have Spell Pierce, and then Essence Capture, Jawari Disruption, and Geist Snare, all as ways to counter your opponent's stuff. Then you have Dream Shackle Geist, just another way to kind of tap down and control your opponent's board. And lastly, the Thirst for Discovery, just a way to kind of churn through the deck. Again, this deck's popped up a few weeks in a row. Really, the only kind of thing that's glaring to me is play a Hollow the Storm Giant, 1 or 2. Like, it's free to add into the deck. It's just, there's going to be games where you kind of go long, you run out of cards. Having a 7/7 ward just seems great, and I don't think it's going to affect your Ascendant Spirit that much. Like, you're on 21 lands, but you can still, actually 22 if you count Jawari. Like, you're going to have games where it could come up and be relevant, especially in like the heavy removal decks. Like when we look against something like this, an Azorius Control deck. So this is an Azorius Control deck, up to about 60% win rate. And really with this here, with Control, you kind of want to look at a couple of things in Standard. Okay, so how are they sweeping you? So this version's on Doomscar. They are playing Devastating Mastery. They're not playing Farewell. Sometimes they're on Farewell, sometimes they're on Mastery. With the kind of ebbs and flows in terms of volume of Planeswalkers, that's where Mastery comes in. Also, if they're playing Mastery, then they're sometimes switching their win conditions. So while this version is on 4 Wandering Emperor, sometimes you won't see Hullbreaker Horror or like Teferi 4, or they won't have the Celestis, things that would get blown up by the Mastery. So these are little like edge cases that you see vary from time to time. Another interesting inclusion is 4 Test of Talents. Largely a dead card when you're facing off against something like the mono white aggro deck, which really doesn't have any targets for it. In mono green Stompy, you have a couple cards that can hit it, but a card that's kind of ebbs and flows. But the way they offset this is by playing Faithful Mending. It's a way to kind of churn through your deck and get rid of the wrong half problem. If you're going to control Mirror, you're not going to want Doomscars, so it's a way to kind of throw those away. Only early removal out of this deck is the March of the Otherworldly Light. So this version here is really relying heavily on your either counter spells to be timely at the time hitting, or just kind of drawing into one of the sweepers. Also has a Miria's Call as a win condition in the land, as well as Hall of the Storm Giants, and no white creature land. So Hall of the Storm Giants the primary way. You have Otawaro and Eiganjo as well within this particular deck. Interesting, you're also seeing them go as far as Tranquil Cove, just to have more dual white lands, dual white blue lands in there as well. And they're even opting heavy draw package. So This version is going to play better into some of like the mono black Orzhov kind of mid-rangey shells. I'd be interested to see like even just a Thalia on curve like really hurts this deck. Not playing anything again because you're on mastery. You're not typically going to play Portable Hole, but you could play something like the 2 mana. What's it? 2 mana Fateful Absence. That. I like Fateful Absence. Usually gets seen some amounts in the deck, but interesting to see this version of the deck. Next, you have Rakto Sacrifice, Raktos Anvil. So this is another 59% deck. This is kind of why I wanted to show the case this week. We have a lot of decks like in the high 50s, low 60%, which is usually not the case. Most of the weeks when I do this, there's 2 or 3, and then some are falling on the wayside. But this is kind of a grind them out deck. You have Anvil to sacrifice creature artifacts to get you value, and then you're just kind of mixing in. You get blood tokens with the Blood Tithe Harvester and Valdaran Aperture. Vaulted Surge can scale from 2 to 4 damage. Warlock class pairs nicely with the Anvil because you're going to want to sack creatures potentially on your turn. Drains them out, gives you some card advantage as well. Synthesizer draws you cards. You have the Statuette. That can be a creature. So it's basically 2 artifacts for 2 mana. When you sack a blood token, it becomes a 3/3 with haste. So kind of a round sweeper type effect. You also have the Smelter that makes you more creatures. And then you 5 draw spells and Deadly Dispute, Village Rites. And then some meaties to sweep up the board. Meat hooks incidentally just play well into like mono white and stuff like that as in kind of playing through. Also gives you access to Den of the Bugbear. It's very ominous that a crow has landed on the tree right outside my windows and like looking in. If I don't make it through this video, you know who came for me. Naya Runes. This is probably one of my favorite decks in at least Alchemy. I think it's a little worse in Standard just because you have mono white aggro being the premier deck. But really, for those unfamiliar, if you have Jukai Naturalist out, which reduces enchantment cost by 1, Runeforge Champion creates an alternate cost for your runes of 1 instead. This allows you to basically cast all your runes for free. You can make very large hasty creatures with like Kami. Generous Visitor puts counters on things. Showdown of Skulls also stacks triggers. Touch of the Spirit Realm can be used offensively or defensively for its channel ability as well. So lots of flexible ways in that. I've played a lot of this deck in Alchemy. Actually, I'm curious now. How many games have I played in Alchemy with this deck? It's pretty much the same deck in Alchemy. So I played over 100 games. I'm almost at a 69% win rate. Nice. But really the only difference is Forsaken Crossroads, which I'm playing 2 of. Because I actually like 2 Hallowed Hauntings in the list. It lets you go over the top in terms of in the mirrors getting evasion. But you can see here like how it tracks kind of your win rate, stuff like that, all the cool details. Next up, Celestine Enchantment. So kind of a different take. This one's kind of this, I think this version into the runes matchup has a slight advantage because they do have removal in Circle Confinement and Borrowed Time, which is exile-based removal, which plays well. Also, it's Hallowed Haunting. They tend to just go really wide, and they could put out enough blockers with Wedding Announcement. This version here, you're not going as incidentally big in individual threats, but you start just pumping into the Hallowed Haunting and getting very large there. Eiganjo also helps you filter for lands, and then like reanimate some of your smaller dorks. Weaver Harmony lets you double your ETB triggers, and then against some decks like a Catilda just runs away with the game. Like seeing this when you're on mono red just makes you cry. Speaking of mono red, it's like I planned this transition beautifully. This is a mono red aggro kind of artifacty style deck. So it's looking to leverage Patchwork Automaton. You have stuff like Ogrehead Helm to draw you cards. Reinforced Ronin lets you get casted each turn to kind of pump this up. And then you're using Seismic Wave to try to kind of be a one-sided board wipe while you put pressure on your opponent. You have a lot of modified creature effects, so Kami's Flare can kill something and deal damage. And then your top end is like Thundering Raiju to push through some damage. This version here is maxing out on creature lands pretty much. You don't want to go like full 8 because then you're going to have a hard time casting some double red spells at times, but 6 creature lands, 3 Sokuzans, a little ambitious just it being a legendary land. You could run into times where you have to kind of tap the land, play another, and then kind of go from there. Up next, Is It a Mill, 56%, and this is kind of a combo mill deck. So casting a copy of Galvanic Iteration or Dual Strike with the combination of Maddening Cacophony or Tasha's Hideous Laughter to kind of turbo mill out your opponents. Otherwise, you're using Ruin Crab with a bunch of lands, and then like Fading Hope or Frostbite to kind of interact, and then Expressive Iteration to draw you cards. You also have Discover the Impossible, which gets you some value, lets you dig for specific answers, but also potentially cast them for free. They're playing Evolving Wilds in part because it gets you double trigger for the Ruin Crab. If you're a professional and you're playing this deck against me, you always have Ruin Crab on 1 into Ruin Crab on 2 and then Evolving Wilds to always maximize the punishment. That seems like my opponent's every game. That's kind of it. 10 decks that have been doing really well this week in the best of 1 format. Like I said, these decks, you can grab them in the video description. And as always, if you can, drop a like, comment, and if you haven't done so, subscribe to the channel. Greatly appreciated if you can. And let me know in the comments specifically what deck you're having the most success with this month, what you've been enjoying most, and if you have any cool and unique decks. I always look to try to feature some off-meta, well-performing decks. Anyways, we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching. Have a great one.